Hi everyone, welcome. Anthony Monteith here from Jade Natural Health, based here in Ireland. I have with me the greatest privilege to have Jonathan Shubs of UAT. And UAT is a system that I got drawn into last year during the first lockdown. I have been watching and in the wings Jonathan's work. I think our paths crossed in 2012, and perhaps we didn't even know we were in the same room. But Jonathan, interesting character, very intellectual, has a lot of insight into not only the fundamentals, the basics, but also the complexities that come with the study of acupuncture. He'll be shortly launching a book to be coming out this year. Details of that will be included in the links below after this interview. So I'd like to welcome Jonathan Shubs of UAT. Jonathan, thank you very much for this interview. It was really appreciated.
Well, thanks for having me, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd like, if you could, share with the viewers a brief outline of your journey to this point now, because I believe you've been traveling the world for some time now, teaching, doing a lot of work, also online, and I've attended some of your lectures. And you, in fact, have developed a complete suite of training. So could you perhaps give us a little interlude on how you got to where you are?
Sure. So I'm a Canadian-born acupuncturist, and I live and practice in Switzerland. I did my original studies here in Switzerland, and I studied with my first, one of my teachers who I then went to study on with and did an internship in his clinic was named Daniel Daria. And he was the first person who I had met who was incorporating, let's say, classic Chinese medicine, meaning pre-1950s Cultural Revolution, TCM. That's what's being taught in China. So with him, I was introduced to master tongue acupuncture. I was introduced to the Sa'am 4-needle technique, and also a bunch of other things. He had studied with Dr. Tan a little bit, etc. So I had already had this introduction from the beginning of something different than the traditional TCM. So I finished with him, did my internship with him, opened my clinic, was starting to work, and then I started to follow Dr. Richard Tan, which is where we actually met one time without knowing it. I think it was in London.
Correct, yeah.
But the first time that I had studied with Dr. Tan, I was in Paris with him, and he was presenting 5 different systems to understand how channels interact with each other. And he was presenting it in a way such as is that there was one theory or one paradigm to describe 3 interactions, and then a different for another 2 interactions. And that really bothered me. It felt to me like there was not a connect between all 5 systems that he was trying to produce, he was showing. So from a technical point of view, from a clinical point of view, that made no difference. But from a logical, theoretical point of view, for me, that was very complicated. So that night I stayed up until I think 5 a.m, coming up with a understanding of what's behind all the channels. Why do they interact? So that was the beginning of what I call the unified acupuncture theory. I then spent about the next 2 or 3 years researching it, trying to understand it from a theoretical point of view and a clinical point of view. I published an article in the JCM, I think it was in 2012, describing that and presenting it. It's called The Foundations of Channel Theory. So that was the beginning of the unified acupuncture theory model that we created. And then I started to incorporate all of the other aspects that I had been studying. So I have studied, as I said, I studied the 4-needle 5-element technique with Daniel Daria. I introduced that into it, abdominal palpation from the Japanese system. Then I started studying the Japanese system, the master tongue system, the I Ching Bagua. And so I incorporated all of them slowly into it to understand how they all fit together. So that took me, and then since then I've been presenting and teaching this system, the channel interactions, as well as the more advanced internal techniques of 4-needle 5 elements, the I Ching Bagua, etc., over the last, I think, 4 or 5 years. So that's sort of my journey of how we got here.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, I've seen the extremes of both, the TCM 1950s, 60s, 70s approach. And it's, I remember a lot of students that were in my class would say, to the teacher, why does that point, for example, the classic pericardium 6 for nausea, right? Why does that work, And the teacher would say, it just does because that's what it says in the book, That's really what used to annoy me, was there was nothing deeper than that. And, in fact, having studied in China, mainly Cui Na, but having seen acupuncture, especially abdominal acupuncture in use, it's very much still the same approach. You don't question the teacher. And, my sojourn into the balance method was pretty much 2008. And I was introduced to that by actually two Cui Na students of mine said, why don't you try this style of acupuncture? And I was, I looked at it and kind of threw the book over my shoulder, like, this is a load of old rubbish. This isn't proper acupuncture. Well, who does this guy think he is? And then it was only when I started getting some really difficult cases, I thought I might just go back and pick that book up and see. And then it started to really make sense. But, obviously what I'm seeing, and this has been going on probably since 2012, is there's kind of this, I call it an acupuncture revolution, which is really just an awakening. But there are people that are sitting in one style of, classics, and another person sitting in another style. And then, of course, there's all these other styles that are doing similar, but just not really in the forefront because I suppose their marketing or their exposure isn't at the same level. But what I like is you've drawn correlations to say, well, Tan highlighted this, Master Tung talked about this, all the other people that, they all seem to have different flavors according to how they were taught by these examples of these teachers. But when you look at the 5 element and the Korean style, there is still balance methods within those systems. And in fact, even in TCM, I was watching some old videos that I have, some old video cassettes of acupuncture from the 1980s and 90s in China, and some big hospitals, and you can see how they were using the feet to treat the head. And it's always been there. It's just we're going through a dynasty. I always say we're going through a type of dynasty, where this is the flavor of acupuncture. And people I see predominantly in the States, there is that people are slowly turning, looking to this system because they're realizing the guy or the lady next door to me is getting better results than I am. Why is that? And then,
for sure. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about how you would advise people who have the potential to want to learn unified systems, why it is that you present it this way, what's the clinical outcomes they can expect?
Well, the first thing is that what was really important for me is because I've studied with many different people, and every time you go into a course, the teacher or the lecturer would often say, this system only works within this system, right? So if you're going to do this, you have to use only this. You can't add anything else in. Now, from a application point of view, from a learning perspective, I can understand that at the beginning because you want the person to really integrate the system. At the same time, I find it's, for a lot of people, they're like, I spent 5, 6, 7 years learning a whole bunch of other systems. I have my basis in either TCM or whatever. Now you're telling me I have to forget everything I've learned and just apply this. So for a lot of people, that's inaccessible. So one of the first things is that I've always been very clear to do is how to create an integrative system. How to say, okay, so we're going to have an underlying understanding of how the channels interact and how the channels work. And then we can build on that with all the different systems that you use. So if you've already studied Master Tong, if you've already studied a Japanese style of acupuncture, a Korean style, a Vietnamese style, a 5-element style, any different type of style, TCM, you can still bring that all together and just incorporate this, and this will give you more of a basic foundation on which to then choose which is going to be the most appropriate clinically useful technique, which is why the first course is called the Foundations course. We concentrate clinically on how to be treating musculoskeletal problems, localized pain, or anything that is local to one area of the body, because that helps us to develop the underlying foundations. But it can also go much deeper, of course. And that's the foundation in which we build all of the other systems on. It's how the channels interact within themselves. So from a clinical point of view, there's a couple of things that are useful here. One is that you're going to be working with distal needling, which is quite useful for a couple of reasons. First of all is you can actually test the efficacy of your treatment by asking the patient to move the joint to see what's happening in that area without having needles in that area. So you can actually see, are you getting a good result? It's also useful because you're not creating more, whenever we put a needle into the body, there's always going to be a slight inflammatory reaction. That is actually what we're trying to provoke. So we're not adding inflammation to inflammation, which is quite useful from that type of point of view. And thirdly, your patients are going to be like, wow, okay, if you were to put a needle in my shoulder because my shoulder hurt, I couldn't understand that. But if you put it in my ankle or my wrist, there's a whole bunch of different thought processes saying, okay, this is something that's going to be, wow, there's something actually happening here that's further than just a local treatment that anybody can put a needle in there. So, a lot of acupuncturists are very
bringing them into the theory. You're showing them the magic.
Exactly, and we're also separating ourselves from the dry needling that is, that a lot of people feel threatened by. But if you're very good at distal acupuncture, then you're not so threatened by it, right? So it also helps you understand that. And we introduced a bunch of other techniques also in how to improve efficacy. So that's from a clinical point of view why it can be so useful, the first course, the Foundations course.
Very good. I mean, I have to say I've attended some of the classes and it won't disappoint. It doesn't matter what level you're at, because your courses remind me a lot of when I'm teaching Qi Gong, is that you can have an advanced student and a junior, and they're both learning the same fundamentals, but the advanced student is probably getting a deeper meaning, and yet the junior student is getting exactly what they need at that point in time. And that's really nice. I think you've done that very well. And you also have the capacity to, I've noticed how you answer questions, you have the capacity to take the answer as deep as it needs to go. And then the student always has that ability to reach out to you, offline, to take that idea, that concept. I know we've had some private conversations, and you've actually, it's nice to look at the work from somebody else's lens, especially when we were looking at the Bagua Jing. I even have stuff, the notes somewhere. It was just nice to see how you constructed it. Because I always felt, being honest with people watching this, that towards the end of Dr. Tan's life, it was a bit of a scramble. He was trying to scramble to get all the information out there, and then he was skipping steps. And so for you, it's like, no, I have the time to scale back and let's rewind, look at that again this way. Okay, let's rewind and go at it again from this track. Let's rewind until it sinks in. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a testimony to how you teach. So I think if anyone's worried about the complexities of it, that they've got nothing to fear, because you will show the same concepts from all these theories.
Yeah. It's also very important for me is that there's a step-by-step logical procedure to where we get to. I don't present anything that I just say, this is the way it is. There's always we start from the ultimate basic concept of all of Chinese medicine, which is yin and yang, and everything comes from there. So we can trace ourselves back logically to yin and yang in every type of technique, which is very useful, because then when you're going to go to different systems, you can bring them back to the yin yang paradigm, and within that paradigm, then you can understand how you're going to integrate it. So even within the 5 elements paradigm, we go back to the yin yang paradigm of 5 elements. With the I Ching Bagua, of course, we go into the yin yang paradigm. With all the different systems we use, we go back into this logical, the basic logic of what Chinese medicine is. There's that, and there's also one thing that I find for me, it's very interesting, is there's the theoretical, when we read classic texts, they're very much based in geopolitical, economic situations of the times they were written. So what I try to do is I try to remove those influences of political and societal influences at the moment and look at the basic theory that we can all agree on, and then bring the treatments out that way. So we sort of lose the influences of which dynasty, what was the most popular spiritual aspect, was the most popular cultural aspect, and we sort of strip that away and we get to the bare bones of what's actually behind the theory, without the flourishing, poetic, beautiful, they're beautiful, but they can also be very confusing, those aspects of the teachings in the past.
I used to call it the dragons and the tigers and the
yeah.
And I try to do the same with the Qi Gong. I try to, we can introduce that later, but I like to just base it on, the fundamental aspect, which is we're doing this now. We're working with this concept. What's interesting as well is, I don't know if you remember Giovanni Maciocia, but I remember many years ago attending a lecture and used to say that Chinese medicine is like a building with like 10 architects. And so the building's quite ugly, it's got all these attachments, and somebody put an extension on the back and somebody put a different roof on. And this is the problem when we're studying TCM style. You're basically getting a group of work that's been put into a blender, mashed up, and then spat out according to the narrative that was in force in those days, And then I feel a lot of the older acupuncturists that I've met that maybe were doctors in the 70s and then were invited to China, they were fed kind of a 6-month intensive. If some person's got a cough, do this. If a person's got fever, do this. And as I say to my students, they like to. Some of them really favor that tongue style, and I just let them go with that. Some of them favor a Tan style or Tan's approach. Some of them just like the esoteric stuff that I teach. But I never tell them, I say to them, have a look at the other aspects of it, because it helps us to understand. Because as I said to you, one of the styles I learned was kind of an esoteric style, but the guy died before the rest of the information came out. So I've been spending the last 10 years trying to fill that information in. But some of the stuff you've given me is like, that's what he was trying to impart. And I think you're correct, there is the cultural, there's that, like the film Lost in Translation, right? There's this cultural aspect that changes the dynamics of the language of the medicine. And we've got to move away from just pushing buttons to actually creating a pathway for us to actually start to treat the patient, but having the flexibility to know that, this is a dead end. But that's okay because I've got another methodology.
Exactly.
You know, so it's having more than one map in your GPS. You know yourself, most of the stuff that we learned, it gets us to the location, right? But it's not always the exact location. It's like GPS. It can get you to 200 yards outside your friend's house, but it's not where your friend's house actually is.
And there's another thing to that.
Yeah.
Is that you get to your friend's house. Let's say the GPS takes you to your friend's house. You still have to then navigate the inside of your friend's house, and the GPS can't bring you there.
No, but you have to have those basic understanding of navigation. Otherwise, there's no point.
Exactly.
And a lot of my students go, well, I did those points that you told me and it didn't work. And I was like, I didn't tell you those points. Those points are an approximation to where you need to go to, but you still got to palpate,
Yeah.
Because,
and that's also a mistake that a lot of therapists, I think it's a mistake, is that they go directly to the point. They go from symptom or diagnosis to point without taking the logical steps of how to get there. And once you bring back in the logical steps, in fact, the points are where you place the needle almost should be the very last thing you do before you put the needle in. And we have a tendency to go from point and then try to understand why we use the point, instead of thinking about what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, what we're going to implement, and then the point itself should just come to us.
Yeah. I can see how Master Tung's work has become quite popular because there's still, not with all teachers, but there are some teachers that it's very prescriptive.
Yes.
These 3 points will treat this and this and this and this and this. And it, jumping from TCM to Master Tung is almost easier.
Of course.
It's like points description. But those people that are very high up in Master Tung's work are saying, well, actually, you need to understand the depth that comes with that Dharma, and I get it.
Exactly.
I get it. It's like, oh, wow, this is treating, tendon and bone tissue issues and then deeper circulatory. But there are some of my students who go, well, I don't want to do that. I want to be able to understand first. And the way one of my teachers actually, who might be watching this, if he's watching this, said to me is, a lot of the work is in the diagnosis, not only the diagnosis. I mean, your treatment path being part of that diagnosis, and actually treating should be easy. That should be just the easy thing.
In some ways, strangely enough, and this is a little bit controversial to say it, but the needles we put in are almost like a placebo to the rest of the treatment. They're a solidification of everything that you've done to the moment you put in the needles, right? They're not we think that the needle is what heals the patient, but that's not at all in my opinion, that's not the path that actually happens. From the moment you're in contact with the patient is when your actual interaction begins. And then the needle is just like putting the period at the end of the sentence for that to be integrated into the body.
Have you ever had a situation where you're conversing with your patient, and before they've really even got a couple of sentences into, you already know what points you're going to do based on that? Or are you very much do the system because sometimes you think you know what to do, but then the patient presents with something that surprises you?
What I say is that the intuition can be a starting point in the exploration of what you're going to do. So I might be talking to somebody, I might have even done some abdominal palpation or pulse diagnosis or whatever I'm going to do to sort of have my focus, like, okay, this is what's going to be right. I'm still going to go and palpate and see what works for the patient. I'm still going to confirm my intuition with the patient's body, right? I'm not going to say, does this point feel like where I should be, is this the point you want me to needle? The patient doesn't know that. but their body does know what it needs. So we palpate and we listen to the patient's body. Often, the more we do it, the more correct we are from our original intuition. But, sometimes 10%, 20%, this is what I missed, or no, it needed to be this. So if we're constantly checking the patient's body instead of using our own intuition, we're going to have better clinical results also. For sure, yeah.
I know you're based in Geneva and you've traveled to Poland. You've been in the Netherlands a few times. We've obviously crossed paths in London.
Yeah.
And being originally from Canada, in Geneva quite some time.
I'm in Lausanne, actually, which is just near Geneva.
Geneva, yeah. I know one of my students went out to visit you and said it was a far more interesting experience than what she'd had before. So, and I get the feeling you said to me the last couple of years, you're seeing, because there'll be people watching this that's saying, well, what relevance would this have to, say, treating mental and emotional disorders?
Mm-hmm.
What relevance does this system have to treating fertility? What relevance does this system have to treating, obviously pain is the bread and butter for a lot of people. But you've taken this system now, you've become almost synonymous with, that mental, emotional, spiritual, psycho-spiritual health.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in these times, the mirror is being reflected back at us because people are really feeling, I would say, so controversial or not, I think people are more in touch with their mental and emotional health now than ever before, right? So could you give, it's very difficult to say, like, for example, in my clinic, it's 70% is pain of some pain and dysfunction. That's partly, I presume, from my Tuina, the Qi Gong, but, I'm seeing a lot of anxiety, mental and emotional, sleep, disturbed sleep. I've done a lot of work with depression in the past. But where would you, so where are you currently focusing, or what's the current intake like for you? But also, so what I'm asking is, this isn't just for pain, right? You can do internal medicine, you can do mental, psycho-emotional stuff.
So maybe I'll describe a little bit of the system. So we call it the Unified Acupuncture System. And we have a certification program where there's 3 levels to the program. We have the practitioner level, and then we have a master's level and an advanced level. An advanced level and then a master's level. The practitioner level has 3 different modules. The first module is the foundations course, where we look at channel interactions, we look at imaging and mirroring, and we look at treating mainly pain, musculoskeletal problems. So that's the first course, which lays the foundation work. Which, as you said, is, the bread and butter of most acupuncturists is their pain work. So this definitely addresses the most financially important aspect of our clinics. Then we move into the other 2 modules. One is a 4-needle, 5 elements approach, and the other is the I Ching Ba Gua approach. And both of those we're going at, say, deeper inside. So we're treating more of the functional problems, more of the internal medicine. And with those 2 systems, they're both treating mental and emotional health. There is a difference between them, whereas the 4-needle, 5 elements is more about movement between the different elements, whereas the I Ching Ba Gua is more about the structure and creating a structure around the 5 elements, we can say. So they're both 5 elements based, but one is more about creating the movement within the structure, and the other is about creating the structure around the movement. So those are the techniques we often use for the mental health, emotional health, and even spiritual growth. And especially the 4-needle, 5 elements I've created this simplified version of interacting with emotions in a different way. And we can actually directly target one difficult emotional state. And instead of just the traditional idea is you're sad, let's get rid of your sadness, we're talking about the transformation of the energy base of the sadness into its general flow. It's bringing it back into its flow within the body as opposed to it being stagnant and overwhelming. So those are the techniques. And then in the advanced course, we take those two main internal techniques and we develop them even further. We go into more complex patterns, more complex theory, more complex approaches, etc. And then we have the master's course, which is at the end, which is a course of not only we go deeper, we delve deepest into all of the aspects we've used. We also introduce advanced trauma work, both emotional and physical trauma work. We introduce practitioner self-care. It's also a way of for practitioners who want to then also go into teaching and teaching this unified acupuncture theory system within schools. It's also a training on how to teach this system. Because there is something else is that although I don't teach it to advanced students, I also teach undergrad students at the Qi Academy in Switzerland. And there I've created a whole system about how to understand and learn the channel system without memorization. It's about understanding the channel system, which is the book that's coming out in July later this year. So that's also taught how to present and how to teach that and how to share that. But to go back to your original question about what's happening in my clinic at the moment, I would say more and more I'm getting the emotional, it's either people who are recognizing an emotional disturbance in their lives because of the confinement, because of all the fear. I look at it as like it's a magnifier. It's actually showing you what's been lying there for years. And that magnification, it's a crystallization of of what somebody's happening. We're in an accelerator. So instead of it taking 5 years to see, you know what, I'm not happy with my life. That's happening now within a period of 6 months, 3 months. So there's a lot of those crises that we're working with. And the advanced tools of the UAT system are great ways to navigate that.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. That you have to have the foundations in anything, right? That's a given.
Exactly.
There's no point delving into the intricacies without a good, solid foundation. And what I want to say to the viewers is we're hosting Jonathan. He's going to be running workshop 13th and 14th of March this year. This is the entry level, but within that, you're going to have exclusive access to Jonathan's knowledge. So I invite anyone that has perhaps even considered studying balance method, but has found it perhaps too overwhelming, or perhaps as a person that was a TAN or a tongue student who wants to perhaps look at another way of building it, building the understanding. And I think one of the crucial things I'm noticing with a lot of my colleagues and students that I teach also is that they always have to have their balance charts with them. But with the way Jonathan teaches is that you never need a chart. It becomes part of you. It becomes part of your critical thinking. And we're offering a discount for the Irish students, and we're going to give you a discount code at the bottom that you can use for the Irish people. But this course is open to Northern Ireland, obviously. But being here in Ireland, I think it's fantastic. This is the time to learn. We're being given space. We're being given this exclusive home university, and I want to impart to people that this is the beginning of of the real change. So what Jonathan's bringing here to us is this idea that this is a complete system. It's not one aspect. This is a system that you can carry with you for the rest of your life, and it's going to evolve. We're blessed. I'm really looking forward. Actually, I'm privileged to have received one of the first transcripts of your book. And I've been reviewing it actually the last 2 days. And it's just brilliant because it brings out that imagination that we have as children. It brings out that critical thinking as an adult, you know, so you've got the child aspect and the adult aspect. And so you can see how the innocence of the child and then the wisdom of the grandparents, you know, and how that comes together to form an understanding. And the understanding is unique. We won't give away too much about the book. It's quite special. But there's this, you can see how a human creates their own path to understanding. And I think that's a really important thing, is what Jonathan is trying to show you is that it doesn't matter which system you use, they all have a correspondence to one another. I've been trying some of the four the Sa'am, the Korean style, and that's fascinating. You know, you can see how, you know, points on the hand and the feet really do affect quite powerfully. And so I want people to understand that you can go as far as you want to with this system. And I do believe later on down the line, you plan to do some business mentorship, self-care mentorship. And so this becomes almost like a university suite of disciplines for people. So I'm going to be inviting my postgrads that have been with me for 4 years. I'm going to be asking my colleagues in Ireland to step up and join in. It's good value. You're going to get, it's not just watch and go. You have access to Jonathan's knowledge. And I do see that it's been accredited to a very high standard in Europe. So if anybody's worried, you know, about the level of education, I've seen that you've managed to build a whole entire system electronically as well. So people have access to information, PDFs, handouts, there's screenshots. And some of the students who've been with you for a while have regular access to the videos. So they can play back. So I want people to understand this isn't just like a one-off thing. This is a whole system that they can build on their computer, or, you know, that they have all these files that they can go back and forth with. And I think it's exciting. It's really exciting times. I think this is the beginning of that renaissance of acupuncture. And definitely I've tried some of the things you've talked about for mental and emotional health, and it's been, especially depression, it's been amazing to see within a week, you know, a person going, I've done 36 of counseling and I feel better in the last week than, you know, and they're wondering what it's like. They can't believe it. It's almost like they want to go back and be depressed because they don't believe they've made that transformation. So I think it's really exciting, and I'm blessed to have met you. It's been an incredible journey. We've been working together, doing a bit of Qi Gong together, which has been great. And you've been helping me with the theory around how certain movements and postures relate back. So I think that's the depth of the wisdom that you've brought, and I can understand why you have so many sleepless nights, because that head of yours is so I really want to thank you for this interview. Is there anything else we need to impart before we go? Is there anything else you'd like to share with people?
It was just one thing that you did mention that I think is interesting is the way we've created the certification system is once you've finished the practitioner certificate, so you've done all 3 modules, you can apply to get the actual certification of practitioner UAT level, which then it gives you a certificate, etc. It allows you to do the advanced courses, but it also gives you access to our website, our members area, where you can see there's a huge amount of case studies for each different method from all the other practitioners in the world who have actually done it. There is lots of demos and teaching modules and a whole realm of a video library of past courses, etc., that you have access to based on your level. And that is, we don't charge for it. It's just you have to have done the 3 courses, and then you have access to that for life. There's no limit to it. So that's how the library works, of getting all the behind the scenes resources, where there's lots of demos, lots of explanations of things that I can't put out there normally because the patient wants to not be seen publicly or for different reasons, but they're there. So there's a huge library of wealth that is also accessible at that level.
That's great. We're going to be leaving a special price for this. Because you're going to want to teach the three stages, right? So the first 3 modules form the first part, and there's this logical progression, right? So you've module 1, 2, and 3 form the first part of the training, and you've got a special price that you've allowed for me to share with everyone. So we're going to leave that in there, and people can jump on board. There's going to be recorded. The training's going to be recorded as well. So
yeah, they'll have access for up to 1 month after the course to watch the recording. And then they also have access to the to the handouts and to the PowerPoint slides as a PDF for, I think it's about a year after the recording. They can still go back to their account and watch that again.
Yeah, we've 2 major associations here in Ireland, and there's another one, a third one, but the 2 major ones. I'm part of a group collective that we all communicate with one another. So I'll be sharing that to them. I'm going to be pushing this out to my interns and postgrads, and then anyone else, any of you that are watching this, that have colleagues, friends who are in the acupuncture field and are thinking of studying or wanting to perhaps examine the reasons why certain acupuncture mechanisms work, then we're inviting you to come on board. And it's been a pleasure spending some time with you this morning. I know we're going to hop off this call and do some training now. So
yes,
it's going to be good fun. And it's been great, really, really great. I've learned a lot myself. I don't think that you can ever stop learning. And thanks for joining me. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you soon.
Yep, excellent.